What is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna with Label Free Podcasts. Live your best life. You must live label free. I'm super excited. I have a very special guest. He's talking about something that I think is very important to talk about, and especially in the society that we live in. We have so many options and so much entertainment at our fingertips with our phones. He is a renowned Wall Street analyst. He's also considered society. He's also taken on the society's biggest problem today, which is divorce. Please welcome Tim Kellis. Tim, thank you for joining us today. Sorry for the little bumpy introduction, but I'm excited about this conversation. Can you please tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, Dan, I appreciate and really am honored to be here as a guest on your show. I love the whole label free concept because when I get into the whole psychology stuff, labels are problems. And if we can be label free, it's a lot better world to live in if we're not labeled. But I'm not a psychologist, actually. Actually, I was raised poor. My dad was a cab driver. In fact, when I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest when I was 12 years old, and then I discovered girls. So that whole career path kind of got derailed. But I did well in school. I have an engineering degree, MBA, and I was actually the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. So that's really a real short summary of my background. But the point about this is at the height of the market, working on Wall Street, I met this girl. Actually, we'd known each other for 8 years. We were in the same circle of friends. She always had a boyfriend, I always had a girlfriend, but we got together when we weren't with anybody else, and we fell in love. And as anybody who's fallen in love knows, it happens very quickly at the very beginning. It's very easy. It's natural. You've met your match, so to speak. It's such a beautiful experience. And then we started fighting. And then more importantly, when we went to the therapist, and I realized the therapist wasn't helping. In fact, what I realized I'm doing, I'm actually advancing the psychology industry with some of my concepts. We can get to a Carl Jung conversation if you want to, but I'm very analytical. And number one is the realization that the behavioral advice, what I do is I address marriages mentally and psychologically, as we were talking about earlier. That's not the way the psychology industry does it. What I do actually works. And you realize that the behavioral advice, which is what you get from the professionals, doesn't work. And there's not a lot of knowledge that's been created yet to teach couples how to create lifelong marriages. And not only that, the pain of relationships ending. I guess I'm just more sensitive or just real sensitive, but it hurt.
Yeah.
It was extremely painful. In fact, in the psychology world, it's called a double bind. The double bind is when you look right, you run into a wall. When you look left, you run into a wall. And my only outlet was, I have a Wall Street analyst background, very analytical. I'm going to approach it as a Wall Street analyst would and come up with something that's very profound and significant that finally gives couples the insight that they need to understand on how to make it work.
Well, so I'm sorry that you had to go through your own experiences to find this way of helping people to prevent happening to them what happened to you. Before we started recording, I did tell you, I don't believe in divorce. Honestly, I was married. I was told my late husband if he ever tried to divorce me, I'd hit him over the head with a frying pan. But unfortunately, his life ended abruptly, very young. He was addicted to steroids, so that was a challenge in our marriage. We went through a lot of counseling, and it's important to find, if someone's going to counseling, it's important to find a good counselor that's going to help you, that's going to help you work through issues and not just keep it going, keep the clock going. You know what I mean? Because I think that they can just egg you on where you're not really solving anything and you're learning how to grow together. It's just let's just keep perpetuating the problem over and over and over again.
Well, there's two things that I explain to people to help them understand when they're looking for a professional, the difference between a good one and a bad one. So the ones that don't work give behavioral advice, and also the industry, unfortunately, is still based on the biology theory, which is that we're animals not able to think. And so the most popular question in therapy is the how does it make you feel question. And when you talk about it being prolonged, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's actually been designed to make therapy as long as possible. Yeah. The only reason why I can say that I have solved the marriage problem, the only reason why I can hold my head up and say I've done that is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old. And that's when you get into the psychology. If you're not dealing with your childhood traumas and healing through forgiveness, you're wasting people's time and their money. And that's unfortunately, most therapists don't address the childhood issues. They don't address the traumas. And even if they identify them, they don't help people heal through forgiveness. And forgiveness means to cancel. And until you completely cancel the anxieties towards those experiences and relationships, you still harbor some resentment, and then those resentments are harbored unconsciously as well. So
Yeah.
exactly, when you get into the psychology of the relationship, you actually learn and understand how those childhood experiences, those childhood lessons are the motivations for you in your marriage today.
Yeah. So tell us about your process and like and becoming this like marriage I don't know, expert on how to prevent people from getting divorced, because you went through your own story, and what really motivated you to start your own group and become this expert around keeping people together.
Well, the biggest motivation, I mean, we have a 50% divorce rate. 50%. Imagine if 50% of our cars failed, or 50% of our phones failed, to put it into a bigger perspective. And when I realized how little out there is that helps, this is, in fact, one of the things I ultimately teach is the most important aspect of your life you sleep next to every night. I mean, that is more important than anything else in your life.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that. And there's not a lot of guidance to give us that. And then again, the pain of that relationship ending is really what motivated me. But what I do, the answer is equality.
Equality.
It's a partnership. But what that means is, in fact, when you read the relationship books, they talk about behavioral equality. That's not equality. Equality is mental equality. And what mental equality literally means, when you understand the background of man and the background of woman, before the education of women, men were logical, women were emotional. That's the way before women were educated. Because before the 60s, women weren't educated and women weren't allowed to get jobs. And that's the big change. One of the things that engineers train to do is look at what has changed to cause a problem. And before the 60s, our divorce rate was single digits. And then women are now fighting for equality because they've been subordinate. It's a patriarchy. I'm in charge. You know, as I like to joke to the men, our days of being in charge are over. And so what that ultimately does, though, Deanna, is what I do ultimately is I eliminate arguments by eliminating control.
Yeah.
The one characteristic that's dominant in almost all relationships that don't work out, and there's nothing else even close in dominance, is control. If you can neutralize the power drive, which is ultimately what I'm doing, you can create a lifelong marriage. And that's a partnership. Again, the answers are simple. It's just putting all the knowledge together in these simple concepts. You know, people just need to figure out this whole big picture of how to make it work. And it's a partnership, you know, and what does that mean? And how do you address your fears? I get into that. You know, how do you understand the motivation? You know, fear is anger.
Yeah, I can see that. I would agree with that.
That's in fact, that's an extremely profound comment, because when you understand, when somebody gets angry and you're addressing the anger and the behavior, you're missing the motivation for the anger, and that's a fear. And when you get into the fear, now you're getting into this, because you'll find out you're blaming the wrong person. Blaming is our goal anyhow, because you're projecting your upbringing onto your spouse.
Yeah.
And that projection is what's causing the conflicts. And when you understand that that's the motivation, both of you then learn to go address the source of the problem instead of the result of the problem.
So what percentage of marriages you think result in divorce because of a control issue?
Almost all of it.
Oh, really? I mean, there's different levels of control. Like, even so my late husband, we weren't perfect. He was 12 years older. I had definite daddy issues because I had a very abusive childhood growing up from my father. So I went after an older man because of that. You know, I was looking for that acceptance, for that stability. And I found someone who wasn't very stable. He took a lot of steroids. And as like, I probably, in our 10 years being together, I probably spent a total of 10 days away from him because he was very controlling. Although it didn't make me think, oh, I'm going to divorce this man, but it wasn't always a very happy marriage. You know, he did treat me like an equal in business, but outside of business, it was, I had to be there next to him. I couldn't do anything without him. If I did do something without him, I would pay for it when I came home. It would be a big fight. So, you know, it was a very abnormal type of dynamic where I was empowered at work, but at home, I was not. So does that make sense?
Well, but the question that you're asking yourself when you're going through that process to figure out the answer is why. And you get, again, a balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be.
Yeah.
But you have to go through a maturity process. Because when I forgave my parents, for the first time in my life, I admit I was wrong. For the first time in my life, I looked at my life from my perspective instead of through the lens of my upbringing. I mean, I am the one that can figure out what I need to be, who I need to be in life, as opposed to looking for validation from somebody else. And that's why somebody's controlling, because that's where the whole codependency thing comes on, is because they aren't happy with themselves. We all know you have to be happy with yourself first. I mean, we've heard that forever.
Oh God, yeah.
And when somebody is controlling, it's a projection of their low self-esteem, their abandonment issues, their mom, they got divorced issues, whatever those childhood traumas that that they don't understand, because these are unconscious experiences, and most of them are even repressed experiences. So it takes some effort to pull a repressed experience out of the attic and bring it back down into awareness. And that's when you really get into the whole deep dive of stuff. But in fact, the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to those experiences, causing even more havoc when you become older, because you're not cognitive enough or mature enough to understand them.
Yeah. So for him being older and I was younger, I really started working on myself throughout our marriage, throughout our relationship. And we started going to counseling and I thought it was just very important to process our relationship. And, there was hills and valleys throughout throughout our counseling. I do feel like I was more aware of what I had going on to the point where I could forgive and move forward and from any trauma that happened in my past. Whereas him being older, he could not forgive different things and he just held on to them and he would talk about it and he'd be like angry and say crazy things. And I was just like, stop talking like that. You have to let it go because it's not healthy for you. How many people do you feel lack that awareness and that ability to really address some of that pain inside to move forward?
We've had divorce for 60 years.
Yeah.
And what you're basically learning when you understand the psychology of a human being is those vulnerable years, those impressionable years are going to determine who you are as an adult. And we're in our second, third, even fourth generation of children of divorce. Isn't it interesting that when you ask an adult whose parents got divorced when they were a child about their childhood, that the very first thing they bring up was how old they were when their parents got divorced. That is a defining moment for a child. Not they played sports or they did well in school or whatever. Their defining moment of their whole childhood was the age they were when their parents got divorced. It's a extremely traumatic experience. In fact, my mom left my dad once for a short period of time and she came back, but I remember that short window, just the thought of my parents breaking up, the thought of that love ending between the two of them. We blame ourselves when we're that young for that happening, all the stuff that we go through. We have to be psychologically aware of who we are as an individual. In fact, when I went through, let me just finish it. When I went through and forgave my parents, after the fact, I realized that I am who I am because of my parents. They went from a liability to an asset in one night, quite honestly. But you realize you are because of those experiences. That's why you're strong or smart or focused or kind or whatever the reason, if you're responding proactively. But it sounds like in your former husband's situation, he was still in that judgment mode, still in that judgment mindset.
Yes, very much so. And I think that, but also very insecure, which prompted him to take so much steroids because he just felt less than. And that's ultimately what killed him. I was administering dialysis and the man's still injecting steroids. Like something's wrong with that, So he was chasing something that obviously he had some demons that he needed to deal with.
Well, that's the point. That's the point. If somebody else defines you, which is all he's saying, that he's got to keep that physique up for women to be attracted to him, or if that was his confidence or whatever, he wasn't comfortable who he is, because your looks or money isn't who you are. Who you are is inside of yourself.
No, definitely not. So when someone comes to because you have a huge Facebook group, right?
I have one of the largest Facebook marriage groups on Facebook. Yeah.
So when someone comes to you and wants to talk to you about how you help people with their marriage, what does that look like for them?
As far as the process I go through with them,
yes.
Or what they're going to experience?
I guess both, maybe the process and the experience.
Well, the process is I start off, I have a 2-hour seminar, and I summarize basically the first half of my message in that seminar, and then I have a workshop, which is I work people through my book. That takes 2 months. Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. When that concept sinks in and people let go of the need to control, what they do is they ultimately learn to take on the world instead of each other. And that is, I can almost hear an audible click in their minds. You can see this clarity, like their eyes, because our eyes are the window to the soul, right? Because most people come to me with sort of a deadened look, a saddened look, a frustrated look. I mean, I was supposed to do a seminar earlier this week with a husband and wife, and I get her on the Zoom call, and she's like, "He's not coming," and she's like, "I guess I just have to file because you were our last hope." And I take couples on the verge of divorce all of the time. And take them to the place where they've been trying to get to, but they just haven't been able to do it together. I'm explaining what we all know, just nobody else is verbalizing that because the professionals aren't teaching it. So we're teaching people, how to base a marriage where nobody's in control. And when that light bulb goes on, then the realization they realize that there's optimism in their marriage. Where most people, when I start working with them, they're in such a bad place. This poor woman with 4 kids. That were all under the age of 7 or whatever. That's going to be, and I'm like, just, oh my God, it hurts. It hurts. And I experience that every day. In fact, one of the things I realized, if you've ever been into a therapist's office, like you said you have,
Yeah.
you'll recognize that there's a tissue box.
Yeah.
Because they know they're going to make somebody cry.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
The only tears I see are tears of joy.
Well, that's good.
I don't blame anybody. That's when you focus on behavior, the therapist is just as much at fault as what the couples are doing. They're saying you're right. In fact, a lot of people go to therapy looking for a therapist that's going to agree with them. That's one of their objectives. And I don't take anybody's side.
Support for Label Free Podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below the waist grooming. Now, ladies, you can use this too. We're all inclusive here. Manscaped is trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. And now we're going to have the ladies too, because come on, ladies, let's be real. We have an exclusive offer for my listeners, 20% off plus free shipping with the code LabelFree20 at manscaped.com. So thank you, Manscaped, for your support. And everybody is welcome to purchase with my code. Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to find some therapists that actually help me work through some of my trauma to allow me to, but I've also been very forthright in wanting to become better. I think that some people might not want to become better.
And you know what? That is so weird of a concept. My whole life has been, you're always supposed to be improving. My biography won't be finished until my obituary, and only God knows my real name. It's just so hard for me to understand people that haven't grasped this, that we're supposed to be making mistakes. I make mistakes every day. I try not to. I'm a moral person. Right. Yeah. But I know I'm doing stuff all the time. I'm always making mistakes, but I'm always learning.
I love that. So can you talk to, we're getting short on time here, but I want to ask, can you share a success story, a couple that you're very proud of, that they did the work with you and they managed to make it through and not get divorced?
So let me tell you 2 stories.
Okay.
So the first story, and this is a couple that was on the verge of divorce, and I got them on the right thing. What I do when I'm done working with couples is I'll ask them if I can record a video testimony. And some of them say yes, and some of them say no. And so I'm getting done with this testimonial, and I hit the stop record button. And after I stop recording, the husband then proceeds to tell me that the biggest impact on working with me has been seeing the improvements in their children.
Oh, wow.
You teach your children.
Well, for sure. They're so impactful like that. I mean, what people don't realize is that dynamic at home is going to perpetuate that same cycle for generations to come if you don't fix it. That's why people are so messed up.
We don't hand down our mental problems genetically or biologically. That's the problem with the professionals. They believe that. We hand our problems down psychologically.
Yeah.
And so when you realize that, you have an option of and I'll use this as my stick at any moment when I'm working with couples. You can either figure it out now, or you can give it to your children and let them figure that out.
Yeah.
But let me give you another story. Now, this couple, I'll have to admit, they were in a pretty good place. They weren't on the verge of divorce, but the story he told me is a fascinating insight into what I ultimately do. In 1970, less than 1% of all law and medical degrees went to women. By 1990, that number is over half. I will never have a conversation about the education of women. Women are educated. Okay. But the biggest hole in our culture today, the biggest challenge that I have working with couples today, because the flip side of that is emotional men. It's still considered a weakness for a guy to show feelings. I'm not gay, not that there's anything wrong with it, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said in that famous episode of Seinfeld. But one of the things that I have to face on a regular basis is guys shut down instead. They're more inclined to, women shut down too. We're both inclined to shut down, but I know it's a lot easier for a guy to shut down. That's why you get the woman nagging, the guy not responding, because the more he shuts down, the more this is the balancing act when relationships aren't working.
Right.
The less one does something, the more the other. So if one's more logical, the other's less logical. One's more emotional, the other's less emotional. That's how the balancing act, the teeter-totter that goes on between couples. So halfway through working with this couple, the husband calls me on the phone. He's a good friend of mine. I've known this guy for like 10 years. He calls me on the phone. He says, so let me get this straight. So what you're telling me is that when my wife is discussing her childhood, I'm supposed to listen?
Oh, yeah, imagine that.
No, but what he then went on to realize was that when she's complaining, he shuts down.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
And he realized that. He goes, so what she's saying is significant. I'm like, exactly. I mean, particularly when you get in those childhood stuff. My job is not to fix you. My job is to hold your hand while you fix yourself. That's what couples need to learn. And when they learn that, here's your biggest asset in your marriage, and that's your shoulder.
Yeah.
And when you realize that you have a shoulder that your partner's supposed to rest on and heal from, that becomes the place of comfort. And that's what you're supposed to be providing, is allow your spouse to be able, in a judgment-free zone, talk about these traumatic experiences in a non-judgmental way, so that they can use you to help them work through the healing process, the forgiveness process. In fact, let me tell you this story. This is kind of fun. I know we're getting short on time, but his name is Bill Burr. Okay, he's one of my favorite comedians, very misogynistic, so women can get upset with him. Okay. But he's telling the story about his wife's about to give birth. Okay. And he finally realizes that he has to get rid of the dog, because the dog has bitten some people. And he doesn't want to be the guy, as he puts it, that is in the news because the dog ate his baby.
Yeah, for real. My goodness.
So he actually finds the trainer that's going to take the dog. And about a week before the date the trainer's supposed to come pick up the dog, he hears his wife in the bathroom crying. And he's getting pissed off because she's handling the situation maturely. And he goes, not me, I was the guy. He does this with his hands. He goes, I'm going to push it down. And so every day he's here, and he's getting more and more upset because every day he hears his wife in the bathroom crying. And not tomorrow. I can play with the dog. Dog's wagging his tail. He gets to play with his dog. And then the day that the trainers come to pick up the dog is when he realized that his wife had been dealing with it maturely, handling the traumatic experience of losing what they thought was their child with their dog, and not him. And what do you think happened when the dog left? Then it came rushing to the fore. This is why guys that are repressive of their emotions, when they do come out, they come out in much more aggressive manner, instead of dealing with them in a mature manner by accepting them and then just confronting them head on. You heal not by ignoring your emotional pain. You heal by living in your emotional pain, reflecting on and thinking it through. One of the things I teach is if you understand it from the other person's perspective, it gives you more clarity on why that experience occurred the way it did. It gives you a more all-engrossing understanding of what takes place. And that's what you're trying to do, because we have become afraid of each other. Martin Luther King was once asked what he thought was a problem in marriage, and his humble response is, oh, I don't know. I think they don't know each other very well and are afraid. Yeah. And we learn to be afraid of our partner.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think it takes a very centered individual to really kind of look at things from another person's point of view, because people get so wrapped up in themselves and they're so self-centered. They don't really kind of try to put themselves in their partner's shoes and say, what is this person feeling? Why are they reacting like this? And, that takes a big person to finally start trying to look at it from another person's point of view. But now
Can
we're
I tell that? Can I tell the story real quick?
sure.
That's kind of interesting.
Sure, go ahead.
So my dad's no longer around. So, you know, he knows I love him. He knows I respect him, but my mom still is. And she's got 4 kids. If you were to call my mom up today and you were asking about raising her 4 children, she will admit how strict she was. I was strict with you kids. She says that to me every time I talk to her. So I go to my 20-year high school reunion and I'm talking to one of my classmates.
Okay.
And I mentioned my strict parent, my parents. He looked at me and goes, "Oh, that's right. You had the strict parents." That comment shocked me.
Really?
Because I realized that when he told me that, I went back to when I was in high school, and I realized when I was in high school, I never, ever, 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 ever looked at anybody else's perspective but mine. That's part of the maturing process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
When you're in high school, I have a 17-year-old son, and I understand intuitively that everything is about him right now, and I accept that, and I understand that because he's developing his own identity, which is what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to do is interfere with that process. But I also understand that when you go through this maturing process, ultimately you're supposed to be able to see the other person. Because remember, this is your partner.
Yeah.
You supposedly love this person, all right?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. So before we say goodbye, Tim, where can people find you, reach out to you, support you, connect with you?
Well, the easiest way is to email me. And my email address is my name, Tim Kellis, Kellis, at happyrelationshipsplural.com. So Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. As we talked about earlier, Dan, I'm the founder of one of the largest marriage groups on Facebook. The name of that group is the Marriage Support Group. In fact, we just went over 23,000 members, and it's very interactive. We do about almost 2,000 comments a day in the group. So you'll go and post a comment, you can get tens of or hundreds of comments from your post. My husband and I, my wife and I were struggling with this. In fact, one of the things I do that makes that group unique is I actually allow other marriage experts to contribute. You find out most groups are for the founder's benefit only. And so I have no ego in this. My mission is to lower the divorce rate, and I can't do that by myself. So yeah. I've got literally about 80 other marriage experts. We actually have a private DM group, so everybody's contributing. So it's a very good, interactive, supportive group. Again, the marriage support group. But again, the easiest way is my email address, timkellis at happyrelationships.com.
I love that. And you guys, I'm going to put the links and his email address in the show notes. So if you didn't catch that, go to the show notes, click on the links and reach out to Tim. If if it can help you, or you know someone that could possibly help, we're all here to bring you some value and hopefully save a marriage. Tim, before we say goodbye, you dropped a lot of wisdom, but I do like to ask for my guests for any last words of wisdom or advice before we say goodbye.
Beautiful. And again, thank you very much, Deanna. I appreciate the opportunity to come on your podcast, and I hope your viewers find some value. So ultimately what I am teaching is instead of this.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is going to be a little abrasive at first, and then quickly you'll understand the point. But the difference between somebody who is intelligent and somebody who is ignorant is one of them knows they're ignorant. And let me tell you the story on how expensive that lesson was for me.
Okay.
So again, I was a Wall Street analyst. I used to be rich. I started in 1993 with $7,000 invested in the stock market. And remember, my dad was a cab driver. By January of 2000, that $7,000 had grown to $12.5 million. I was worth $12.5 million in January of 2000, and I lost almost all of that in 6 months.
What?
It cost me $12.5 million to realize that I didn't know everything.
Wow. Holy cow.
I was at the very end of a 20-year bull market. I had grown 7,000 into 12.5 million. It was going to 100 million. I mean, the internet, I was investing in internet companies. It was all the market was never going to crash in 2000, the roaring 90s or whatever. And I was wrong. And it took me $12.5 million to realize that I didn't know it. In
Wow.
fact, one of the reasons why I tell this story is I'm depreciating it over everybody that listens. So I can share the pain, so to speak, and help me feel better. But I have played what if with myself every day for the last 20 years.
Okay.
Well, for one thing, I wouldn't be here if I'd have sold my portfolio in January 2000. I'd be worth $100 million. Amazon, Netflix, Facebook. It's not been, rocket science to make money in the stock market over the last 20 years. So I could have easily built that 12 to even much bigger numbers, but I didn't. And it's the lesson that taught me that I'm teaching other people. So if you realize that you don't know everything, that will take your marriage to a place that is an unbelievable beginning, that the two of you coming together and figuring out how to grow together, which is ultimately what I'm doing, teaching couples how to grow together so that they can learn to take on the world instead of each other.
I love that. Thank you for that, all the stories, and especially that one, because that hurts a little bit.
Yes, it will.
But it was been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Please keep us informed on any new projects or anything else that we can bring you back to update the audience, and just to bring that value, and hopefully we help someone and touch their lives in a positive way so they don't have to go through that painful process of divorce. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Radulescu with Label Free Podcast. Live your best life. You must live label free. Please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, share, follow, all those good things. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.